I watched Elena sleep, her face peaceful against the silk pillowcase, while I held the small, leather-bound book that had just set my entire world on fire. On the cover it said Daily Graces in elegant gold-embossed script, but inside it was a ledger of every time she'd broken her vows since the day we said I do. My thumb hovered over a name I recognized, a name that made my stomach turn into a knot of cold lead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that little book ended my marriage in a single night, I need to take you back to where it all started. Elena and I were the couple everyone pointed to when they talked about marriage goals. We had been together for 7 years, married for 5. We lived in a restored Victorian in the Heights, a neighborhood where the lawns are manicured and the secrets are kept behind heavy oak doors. I'm a structural engineer. I build things that are meant to last, and Elena is a freelance graphic designer with an eye for beauty. We had our routines: Saturday morning trips to the local bakery for sourdough, Friday nights at a dimly lit jazz bar downtown, and the way she'd always squeeze my hand 3 times whenever we were in a crowd. It was our I love you code. About 2 years ago, Elena started struggling with what she called the gray fog. She said she felt disconnected, anxious, and ungrounded. I did everything I could to support her. I took over the cooking. I encouraged her to see a therapist, and I listened for hours. When she came home one afternoon with a beautiful leather journal, she seemed genuinely excited. My therapist suggested a gratitude practice, she told me, her eyes shining for the first time in weeks. Every night I'm going to write down one thing I'm grateful for, just one grace to keep me anchored. I was so relieved. I even bought her a high-end Mont Blanc fountain pen for her birthday just to encourage her. I wanted her to heal. I wanted my wife back. That should have been my first warning. The healing seemed to happen almost too fast, but what came next was so much worse. The first crack appeared on a random Tuesday in November. Elena had been out late for a client meeting with a boutique firm across town. When she got home, she was glowing. She looked more alive than she had in months. But as she brushed past me to hang up her coat, I caught a scent. It wasn't her perfume, and it wasn't the smell of a corporate office. It was the distinct, smoky aroma of a wood-burning fire and expensive bourbon. We don't have a fireplace, and Elena strictly drinks white wine. When I mentioned the smell, she didn't even blink. "Oh, the client took us to the Hearth," she said, naming a rustic, high-end bar downtown. "They have those outdoor fire pits. It was freezing." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But a week later, I found a receipt in the pocket of her favorite wool coat. It was for a dry cleaner's, but it wasn't for her coat. It was a claim ticket for a man's navy blazer. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said she'd picked it up for her brother, Sarah's husband, as a favor. It seemed plausible, if a bit odd. If that was all I found, maybe I could have let it go. But then I noticed the journal. She was becoming obsessed with it. She took it everywhere. If we went on a weekend getaway, the Daily Graces went in her carry-on. If she went to the gym, it was in her locker. She never left it lying around, and she never wrote in it while I was in the room. I thought she was just being private about her mental health journey. I respected that. Until the night she left it on the kitchen island while she ran out to the car to grab her phone. I didn't mean to look. I really didn't. But the book was splayed open, and the handwriting was so frantic, so different from her usual neat script, that I thought she might be having a breakdown. I leaned over, intending to just close it, when a name caught my eye. Julian.
Julian was our contractor. He'd spent 3 months renovating our kitchen the previous summer. The entry was dated October 14th, our wedding anniversary. It didn't mention the watch I'd bought her or the dinner I'd spent 4 hours cooking. It said, "Grateful for Julian, the way he looks at me in the sunlight of the unfinished guest room, 2:15 p.m. The heat between us is the only thing that makes me feel real anymore." My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it stopped entirely. I felt a rush of heat climb up my neck. I flipped back a page. September 22nd. "Grateful for Marcus, the Marriott, room 302. He's so much louder than Mark. I need the noise." Marcus? Marcus was my college roommate. He'd stayed with us for a week in September while he was in town for a conference. I felt sick. I had to grip the edge of the granite countertop to keep from falling. I flipped back further. It wasn't a gratitude journal. It was a trophy room. Every entry followed the same sickeningly methodical format. The name of the man, the location, the time, and a gratitude that was actually a graphic, visceral description of what they had done together. It went back years. There were names I knew, friends, colleagues, even a guy from her yoga class, and names I didn't. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a curated collection of her conquests, a secret history of our marriage written in the ink I had bought her. I heard the garage door moan as it opened. I slammed the book shut and shoved it back exactly where it had been. I retreated to the living room and picked up a book, my hands shaking so violently the pages rattled. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but I had to be patient. I had to see how deep this went before I burned it all down. I spent the next 3 days acting completely normal. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I kissed her. I ate the dinner she made. I even asked her how her journaling was going. She smiled, that sweet, deceptive smile, the one I used to find so comforting, and told me it was the only thing keeping her sane. She had no idea how right she was. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. I didn't want a he said, she said argument where she could gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. I decided to orchestrate a reveal. We were supposed to have a small dinner party that Friday, just a few friends. Among the guests were Marcus and his wife, and my brother Sarah and her husband, the one she'd supposedly picked up the blazer for. It was the perfect stage. She had no idea what was coming. The night of the dinner, the house smelled of rosemary and roasted lamb. The table was set with our best china. Elena looked stunning in a deep emerald dress. She was the perfect hostess, laughing, pouring wine, telling stories. Marcus sat across from me, avoiding my eyes, while his wife chatted happily about their upcoming vacation. The air in the room felt thick, like a storm was about to break. I waited until we were halfway through the main course. The conversation was at its peak. I stood up, tapping my wine glass with a spoon. The ringing sound cut through the laughter like a knife. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. My voice was calm, unnervingly steady. Elena beamed at me, her eyes soft. "Oh, Mark, you don't have to," she teased. "No, I want to," I said. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the Daily Graces journal. I saw the moment she recognized it. The color didn't just leave her face. It was like the life was sucked out of her. She went completely still, her fork hovering inches from her mouth. "I wanted to toast to Elena's gratitude," I continued. "As many of you know, she's been keeping a journal to help with her perspective, and I found it so enlightening that I thought I'd share some of her most recent graces with our closest friends."
"Mark, put that away," she whispered. Her voice was thin, reedy. Her hands began to grip the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Why, honey? It's so inspiring," I said. I opened the book to a bookmarked page. I didn't look at her. I looked directly at Marcus. "Let's see. September 22nd. Grateful for Marcus. The Marriott, room 302. She mentions that you're louder than I am. I assume she's referring to your insightful conversation, right, Marcus?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Marcus's wife turned to look at him, her expression shifting from confusion to horror in a matter of seconds. Marcus looked like he wanted to melt into the floorboards. Elena finally found her voice, but it was a scream. "Give me that book!" She lunged across the table, knocking over a bottle of red wine. The dark liquid spread across the white linen like an arterial spray. I stepped back, holding the book out of her reach. "Oh, we're not done," I said, my voice dropping an octave. I flipped the page. "How about this one? June 15th. Grateful for the navy blazer. You remember that one, Elena? The favor for your brother-in-law. Except the entry says you were grateful for how easily it came off in the back of his car." My brother-in-law, who had been leaning back in his chair, suddenly looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His wife, my sister, stood up so fast her chair screeched and toppled over. The room was a chaos of gasps and muffled sobs. Elena wasn't fighting anymore. She had collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, violent sobs. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to protect her. I didn't feel the need to fix her fog. I felt nothing but a cold, clean clarity. I laid the journal in the center of the table, right in the middle of the spilled wine. "I think the gratitude practice is over," I said. I looked around the room at the men who had betrayed me, and the women whose lives were now shattered alongside mine. "Dinner is over. Please leave, all of you." The house cleared out in minutes. The sounds of slamming car doors and raised voices faded into the night. Elena stayed in her chair for a long time, staring at the book soaked in red wine. She tried to apologize, tried to say it was the fog, the grayness, a compulsion she couldn't control. I didn't listen. I didn't have to. The truth was written in her own hand, in the ink I'd bought her, in the book I'd encouraged her to fill. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. I didn't want the house. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the graces she'd found in other people's beds. I moved to a city 3 states away, started a new firm, and changed my number. People ask me if I'm bitter, if I'll ever trust again. Honestly, I feel lighter than I have in a decade. The weight of her secrets was never mine to carry, and I'm just glad I finally put the book down. I'm starting fresh, and if I were to keep a journal now, today's entry would be simple: grateful for the truth, no matter how much it burned.